Welcome everybody. This is Rev Games. We're going to be doing another game theory video and really just seeing where it goes. I don't write scripts for any of this stuff. I kind of just talk. So let's just jump right into it. And really the question we want answered here is it useful in multiple contexts to identify the type of game or the game you are playing within Yu-Gi-Oh or any card game for that matter in a process called game selection to help increase your win rate? And that's what we're going to find out. Before we get started, get your dick out of your hand and hit that sub button. I know you got your dick in your hand. You're sitting there with your dick in your hand. Hit that sub button, hit that like. Comments are always appreciated. So let's get into it. So what is game selection? So I'll really um, try to apply this to a few different things. This is something that's extremely important when it comes to something that I do for fun, which is investing. Um, but it can be really applicable to real life as well. So game selection is just identifying what game you are playing and what game you are trying to win. So I'll do the investing side of things first. Well, actually, let's do the real life side of things first because I think that'll be a lot more relatable for a lot of people. Which would really be identifying, really it could be almost anything. It's very broad, but what you're trying to accomplish and who you're trying to compete against. So, a game in this case could be uh, maybe a career. Like if you are, um, competing to maybe, let's say, get into accounting or something like that, and you have an idea of the lifestyle you want to live, and maybe you want to get into that field so that you can support X number of kids or a family, or maybe move somewhere that you've dreamed of moving your whole life. That more or less could be considered a game in this context. Um, and why it's important to identify the game you're playing is if you're competing to be the richest guy in the world, you're going to have to compete with Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or whatever. So it's really important to set your sights on the game you're playing so that you can figure out what path you're going to have to follow to get there. Because being a very, very rich billionaire is going to lead you down a very different path than getting an accounting degree, a steady job, and an income, some savings, and maybe a family if that's what you want. Maybe it's not, but really just to kind of to finish that off, if you want to be a billionaire, you probably have to start your own business, and you have to start a business with a huge addressable market like online shopping like Amazon, or iPhones like Apple, or electric cars like Elon Musk did. You have to just go for those really, really big opportunities that are going to be big in the next 20 years. You can't think big. You got to risk it all. You got to YOLO that shit. If you want to be successful as an accountant and you have a vision on what your personal life looks like, uh, you're going to have to think about how much free time you can set aside to study, or if your partner, if you have one, is on board with you pursuing maybe an accounting degree or your CPA or whatever it is. You're going to have to think about how to make yourself more marketable and building a resume. So I think you guys get the picture. You have to figure out what your ultimate goal is, more or less, and how you work backwards from that goal to accomplish it. So that's the real life application of this. The investing side of things is a little bit more nuanced, and I, if you don't invest, this probably isn't going to make a lot of sense to you, but there are a lot of different ways to skin the cat with investing. You could sit in front of a computer all day and trade all different types of stuff and maybe identifying trends, or looking at charts all day and graphing it out. Um, you could um, more or less maybe just look at fundamental stuff and look through the accounting data and see if there are any things that tip you off that a company's headed in the right or wrong direction, and make money more on the longer side of things. Um, and really anything in between. There are a lot of different ways to make money. People make money investing in real estate. They're playing a different game than somebody is going to invest in stocks. Or there are people that invest in very, very risky startup ventures, out in California and stuff, and big tech companies. There's a lot of different ways to invest. And really the most important thing when it comes to investing is figuring out what edge you have if your investing strategy requires you to have an edge to make extra money. Because a perfectly valid investing strategy is to just buy index funds, which are just very boring, cheap, low cost type deals, and just set it and forget it. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, you'll probably do better than most people that try really hard with this every day. Um, but kind of where I'm coming with this, if you take a more active approach, let's say you want to invest in stocks. Well, you have to know how your opponents are investing in stocks, because when you buy a stock, someone else is selling it to you. So you have to really put together a mosaic of who you think is on the other side of those trades and what type of time frame they're working with on that trade. Because it's important to know your enemy just as much as yourself. Because the chances are, if you're a day trader and you're holding something for a week or two or a day or just a few months, um, who you're competing against are very, very sophisticated, high frequency trading algorithms that have supercomputers that are right next to the stock exchanges, and they get information way faster than you. They use AI to parse every quarterly statement within moments and then trade on that. Those other participants in that, if you're going to hold a stock for a few months, are hedge funds. And guess what? They not only buy credit card data just so that they can see where purchases are going, but they also buy order flow. They can see where the economy is going to be headed way better than you because they buy things like that. They even have satellites that allow them to monitor parking lots so that they can forecast revenue and earnings and the like for big retailers and places that have a physical presence. So, what you want to ask yourself when you're faced against an opponent like that is, do I have an edge in the game against somebody that has that much more analytical and capability information than I do? And the answer that I've come away with is absolutely not. I mean, I can't compete in that game. Where you can compete is if you look at a business and you have a fundamental understanding of what the competitive advantage of that business is, not in the next quarter or not in the next week or not in the next year, but over 5 to 7 to 10 years. And you have a better vision um, of the competition in that. And why you can have an edge with that, and this is my own personal investing philosophy, and I won't stay on this for too long, but um, most investors can't physically hold investments that long. Um, because if they have to hold an investment for 7 years, that means they can't put that money to work for 7 years or 10 years or whatever it might be. And you, if you're going to hold an investment for that long, are going to be in for a very, very bumpy ride. There are going to be years that are absolutely awful. There are going to be years that are going to be good. And the idea is you're going to have more good years than bad years. But where the issue arises is most professional investors aren't just, investing their own money. They have clients. So their clients are not going to allow them to underperform or lose them money temporarily for that long of a period of time. They'll get fired. So what happens in the investing business is everyone gets smushed into very, very short-term thinking, um, and they invest for the next year or the next 2 years at most. They don't really look out that much further than that, and that's a recipe for really some bad stuff. So you can have a huge advantage if you just look out further, because most professionals cannot do it. That is your advantage when it comes to at least stocks, by investing over a longer time horizon than people that have way more information from you because you don't have clients. So that is the preamble to what we're going to be getting into, and maybe some things you can take away from this video and game selection as it relates to a card game or Yu-Gi-Oh, or maybe even life. I don't want to get too philosophical with it, but really we're going to be talking about game selection in three contexts, and these are just the ones that came off the top of my head when I was thinking about making this video, which is deck building. Number two is going to be tournaments, and number three is in game and Crow's Nest Yu-Gi-Oh! A few weeks ago. I believe it was Snack that did the video, did actually basically this thing, which is partially what inspired this. But if anyone's played Magic the Gathering, for that third topic in game, it's called Who's the Beatdown. And I think it's a really, really important concept to understand if you're going to play any game like Yu-Gi-Oh! But we'll start with game selection in Yu-Gi-Oh! And this one's probably going to be the most fuzzy. But a deck that a lot of people get, myself included, when they're trying or when people are trying to get into new formats, a question they'll ask is, what deck should I play? What's the best deck? And I think the answer to that question more or less depends on what type of player you are. Again, this is a little bit fuzzy, but I don't really necessarily think there's going to be a best deck for everyone. I have said verbally on this channel that I think the overall best deck is probably Chaos Turbo in GOAT format. In Edison format, it's almost definitely going to be Heroes. I think that format is still developing, but I just have a really hard time seeing it not going that way. It's probably going to become like more or less a turbo-ish type deck in Edison. Happy to be proven wrong on that, but I mean it's insanely powerful and consistent and Edison's a very inconsistent format, so it's kind of the perfect storm. So those are the answers that get tossed around a lot. But I really do think if you're going to play this game somewhat casually, you have to understand what the best deck is going to be for you in one of a few different ways. So the first is what type of player you are. So I like to break down players in like really three main categories, or at least decks, which are combo, control, and combo, control, and aggro. And there are people that are just naturally more gifted at each of those types of playstyles. And I think the best deck for you is going to be very different than the best deck for someone else. I would consider Chaos Turbo very much so a control deck in GOAT format. The name Turbo throws a lot of people off, but it's a resource-based deck. And yeah, the resource plussing is probably a little bit easier than it should be, but it's definitely a control type deck. There are a lot of modern players that might be wanting to get into GOAT format, and maybe they are going to be a lot more comfortable with a combo deck, because if you play modern Yu-Gi-Oh, and it's probably likely that you like that style of gameplay. So maybe you like Reasoning Gate Turbo or Dragon Turbo and Edison format. That's probably going to fit your personality in a few different ways, and it's going to fit your strengths. Maybe you come from a game that has more prevalent aggro strategies, like Hearthstone. And in that case, you're probably better off with something like Warrior in GOAT format. And that takes a whole different skill set. That's really more about risk taking and knowing when to basically show your hand and just go all in. Because any Warrior game you play, you're basically going to have to, at some point in the game, play into a torrential, or you're going to have to play into a Mirror Force, and you're just going to say, hey, if I don't go for it now, I'm never going to go for it, and I'm never going to win. You have to have the huevos rancheros to just lay your cards on the table and go for game. And those are very different skill sets, between each of those decks. So I think it's good to understand what type of player you are, which kind of goes into the second point, which is that if you're playing either a strategy like combo, aggro, or control that doesn't fit your personality, you're probably not going to have that much fun. And if your personality also is very, I want to win and all I care about is winning, and you're playing, Pac-Man in GOAT format or like Crystal Beasts or something in Edison, you're probably not going to stick around and you're not going to be making the best plays. Vice versa, if you're a more casual player that really likes, just really fun kind of sparks flying in the game and pulling off that, 1 in 10 crazy win condition, you're probably not going to be having that much fun playing Chaos Turbo in GOAT format. And you're probably not going to have that much fun playing Hero Beat in Edison. So that's kind of the second dimension to this, which is the what is it, the Timmy Jimmy spike or whatever that they call it, um, is really figuring out who you are and what you enjoy doing. Um, and me personally, like I really, for personal reasons and health reasons and all that stuff, like, but also just personality wise, I really do not think I would enjoy like getting real into the tournament scene. Like I'm not saying I'd never like go into a tournament, but quite frankly, like sitting down and playing GOAT format for like 8 hours on like a Saturday, that does not sound fun to me. It doesn't sound fun at all. Like I would have to be paid to do that. Like someone would have to literally pay me money and say, you have to go do this. This is your job now. Because I am the kind of guy that likes to hop on a game, and I'm the guy that, spends some time in the deck builder and just dicks around for a while and, scrolls the Discord and plays just a handful of games. It doesn't sound fun to me to play that long. Um, but that's totally different with other people. They feel good and energized after they spend a bunch of time playing Yu-Gi-Oh for 8 hours. More power to them. So that really concludes the first topic, which is game selection and deck building. Next is going to be tournaments. This, I think, is also important if you want to enter tournaments, and really understanding how good you are and the game you have to play if you want to win the tournament. And this also goes hand in hand. Do you want to top the tournament or do you want to win the tournament? You have to answer that question when you play a tournament. And a lot of good players are saying, of course I want to win. I want to win the whole thing. Um, but there are a lot of people out there that just want to top. They'd be happy with the top. So when you answer that question, that really boils down to, again, how you're going to play and how much variance you're going to incorporate in your strategy to either win or top or just have a good time at that tournament. And let's take GOAT format just because it's what I'm familiar with and who I know the most players on. So there are some extremely good GOAT format players, and this is not a comprehensive list, but let's think about players like AJTVLS or Ivan Rosito. These are incredibly good Chaos Turbo players, and they normally play Chaos Turbo. Now let's take somebody that's at like my skill level, who's not totally a scrub, but really isn't all like professional either, and is nowhere near on the level of those guys. If I go in that tournament playing Chaos Turbo, it's not going to be a 50-50 just based on the deck choice if I go up against players like that. They're going to have a pretty large advantage on me just because they are better. If I go into that tournament with a totally different deck and we decide not to do Chaos Turbo Mirrors, I more or less am going to need to rely on variance to win that match. So if I go in with something that's more high rolly, like Reasoning Gate Turbo, or in Edison format, Dragon Turbo, I can be a much worse player and still take tournaments from those guys and smack them hard. And that's why I think we're seeing in Edison format a lot more players that probably aren't honestly that good, bringing stuff like Chaos Turbo, or not a Chaos Turbo, a Dragon Turbo rather, in Edison format, because it's a casino deck. That's why bad players usually gravitate towards Lightsworn. And that's not a knock on them. I think it's very admirable to know that you're bad and know that you're going to be relying on variance to win a tournament. And you can win tournaments that way. Anyone could win a tournament with Dragon Turbo. Not anyone could win a tournament after, let's call it 8 rounds and then a top 8 with Chaos Turbo against professional players. It would be unbelievably unlikely to do that. If you want to win a tournament, you have to, if you're not as good of a player as the professionals, play a higher variance deck and understand that you might have a lower all win rate, but you're probably going to have a higher ex ante chance of winning that tournament if that's what you're going for. So that's enough said about that. Next is, what was it? It was deck building, tournaments with game selection, and then in-game. And I think this is also very important, and it's kind of one-dimensional. And I said I'd kind of give a shout out to the Crow's Nest Yu-Gi-Oh video. I would highly recommend watching it. It's called Who's the Beatdown? I don't know if that's the title. It says like Yu-Gi-Oh players need to know this magic theory or something like that. But it's by Snack. You can You can find it. It's like a few weeks old. But it's basically a theory which is that within the first few turns of a game, you need to understand who's the aggro deck and who's the control deck. And that is totally irrespective of what deck you're playing. So let's take a Chaos Turbo Mirror and say that's a control deck, so it's control versus control. Well, no, not really. After 2 to 3 turns, you have to make a decision, aka a game selection, on how you're going to win that game. And if you're down on cards, or you're down on, let's just say down on cards, or maybe down on life points, something like that, you have to make the choice if you're going to have to aggro them down, because that's probably the only way you're going to win. You're not going to win by getting that really lucky pot of greed into graceful into duo as much as you are hopeful for that. We all have played games where we've clawed our way back after we're down a bunch of cards. But at some point in the game, you have to determine who is the aggro and who is the control. And that's going to depend a lot on game state, like who is on board, who has card advantage, what are the life points. So it's not as simple as the point I just made or the hypothetical I just made. But I think it's really important at some point in the game to select the game you're playing, which is that I need to win faster, even if it's just simple as that, or I need to win slower, or I need to slow this game down and extend it, or I need to speed this game up and get this over with as quickly as possible. You need to find out the game you're playing. And this, is going to be probably the most obvious example, but, something like time rules. If there's 5 minutes on the clock and you're losing game 2, like you really have to make a decision on what game you're going to play, how you're going to side, if you're really far behind, whether or not a scoop is necessary, what that matchup is. If you're playing something that sacrifices life points for advantage, do you want it going to time? These are all questions that you need to answer and select a game, aka an outcome, and how you're going to get there, on how you're going to win. So that's really all I have to say about it. Really, just to summarize, game selection is the process of figuring out the game, or kind of the outcome that you want to happen in the game is more or less the path to that outcome. And that can vary in really a few different dimensions, which is deck building and what you play, how you play, your play style, and how you have fun with the game, tournaments, and kind of really looking inward and wondering how good you are at the game and whether or not it makes sense to play a low variance deck against players that are better than you. Hint, hint, it's not a good idea. That's why I'm still so surprised that bad players play Chaos Turbo as much as they do in GOAT format. And then also, in game, what's your path to winning? And selecting the game, or the path more or less that gets you there. And these all really, again, are kind of fuzzy, but these are questions that you need to ask yourself really all throughout the process if you're going to play tournaments or you're just going to play on ladder. Which maybe brings up a good point. If you're net decking a Chaos Turbo list off of somebody that won a top tournament, like a really good example of this would be Anthony Alvarado's list that had Zumbira the Darks in the main. That's not going to be a good deck for ladder. That is hyper optimized and pre-built for a Chaos Turbo Mirror, which is going to be the vast majority of top tables and matches that go down in a GOAT format tournament. That's going to hurt you so much more than you think if you're going on ladder, and ladder is nowhere near as much Chaos Turbo as those tournaments. So hopefully that summarizes it. Let me know what your thoughts are on this. It's always helpful if you drop a sub too, but for now, we're out.